I met quite a few. A guy named Robert Mueller in Western Washington there, and another guy named Bob Zawada, who wrote the cancer article with me, and another guy named Bruce Lipton. These were all people who used to operate laser shows for entertainment industry. And I'm telling you this story for one particular reason, that all three of them independently reported something to me which I found fascinating. They said that they had observed that they became physiologically addicted to operating laser shows. So here is this is an addiction, not unlike a narcotic addiction, that if you get around laser shows and you do it regularly, eventually you're addicted. Okay? What does that mean? So the laser is coherent light, acting as a carrier wave for the light of the aura. And suddenly you have a dissipation, a distribution path for the light of your own aura. And if you haven't found another way to get bliss, to project the light of your own aura, you literally become physically addicted to being at and steering lasers. What does this tell you about the need of DNA to steer its ultraviolet into a laser? Fascinating idea, huh? Yeah? So this is the concept of the harmonic module. So right now we have the capability of linking 6 to 12 hearts over the internet. Using an averaging function, an algorithm, we're eventually going to be able to link a large number of hearts over the internet. And the ability to do that requires agreement. The ability to have biological entrainment requires psychological agreement. So consensus process, political agreement, is identical with the biological process of creating entrainment between hearts. When hearts can link up, political agreement will necessarily follow, because the biological information transfer sets the baud rate, the handshaking, for political agreement. Yeah? Precipitation is as easy as understanding why clouds gather over children when they dance barefoot in mud blissfully. If you take most average children and ask them, they can focus their attention in a cloud and put a hole in it. The physics is simple to understand, that the difference between water in the vapor state and water in the droplet state is the seed of symmetry which charge creates. So by moving capacitive fields into concentricity of focus, literally charge implosion, you steer the water vapor into columnation, literally the fabrication of an envelope. So the function of the cloud seeding machine was to plant seeds of capacitive symmetry to turn the vapor into a droplet. But you do the same thing with your attention electrically. So cloud seeding is called precipitation, right? So the physics of making rain is the physics of columnating magnetism to teach the physics of how water can share. So the vapor needs not be separate, but can share space in the envelope we call the droplet. So let's test our understanding of this by looking at James DeMayo's paper called Desertification and Patriarchy from the Orgone Wilhelm Reich literature. So James DeMayo, this is at soulinvitation.com/desertify. He's famous. He runs an Orgone Institute in America, James DeMayo. And he writes this paper. And what he observed was, if you are an archaeologist or an anthropologist, and you make a map of the spread of laws making public affection illegal in North Africa, you would have made a map of the spread of the Sahara Desert. So just strictly anthropologically, strictly from a statistical viewpoint, if you track the spread of laws where public affection is illegal, you're tracking the spread of a desert. It's simple population data. Okay? So now, having observed this statistic that if you pass a law making public affection illegal, you create a desert, we need to understand the physics. The physics is, when you touch someone, what happens is that the shortwave in your body has the opportunity to check for symmetry with respect to the longer wave of magnetism in someone else's body. And so there's a moment at which the magnetism inside you and the magnetism inside the person you touch check for which waves are shareable, called symmetry, with the result that touch is literally the creation of the possibility of biology's first longer wave. So creating long waves in biology requires columnation, which requires touch. So in effect, what happens is that passion and glandular touch and the ability to fabricate long waves in people creates columnation in the clouds and thus rainmaking. Or, for example, when Bill Witherspoon put a Sri yantra in the desert by carving a shallow ditch in the shape of a Sri yantra, which was like a mile across. It was huge. It was the size of about 6 football fields. And then he just pours paramagnetic sand in the shallow ditch in the shape of a Sri yantra, and he measured the improvement in rainfall and soil fertility over the next several years. He fabricated a microclimate. It's like the lady who arrived at my farm. I used to say the princess on the pea. And she said, "Oop, please remove the screen from the window because it's fractionating the air." If you take a flow form which has braided water into extreme laminar coherence at the bottom, improved seed germination, surface tension, specific gravity, and sorting solids by mass, and light scattering coherence measure. If you take that same water and you pass it through a sieve or a strainer, you lose a lot of those wonderful possibilities, probabilities. And what's the physics? The physics is that the laminar coherence is a braiding operation that if you fractionate it, you create death. So extrapolating the principle here, fractionation is death, fractality is life. Yeah? So the physics here is, if you take a whole apple and you bite into a whole, fresh, really good apple, speaking of lunch, what happens? You feel a tingle, don't you? You feel a charge. Now, if you take the same apple and you chop it up with a metal knife and you cook it and you take a bite of it, what do you taste? No tingle, right? Well, the new information I have for you today is the tingle is the food. They didn't tell you that before in school. So instead of paying people to process your food, you pay people for the privilege of keeping their hands off of it, right? So in the West, we're accustomed, the more food has been processed, the more we pay for it. But it should be the opposite. The less food has been touched, the more you should pay for it. Because fractionation versus fractality, it's the charge density that is the food. So you begin to douse for that, and this will then be the introduction to our twinkling eyes conversation tomorrow, where you simply select life force in everything you eat and everyone you hug, and thus each spin. So this creates the charge density we call life force and awareness. Well, you have 3 kinds of structures. One kind of structure that bends magnetism coherently. You have another kind of structure that has almost no effect on magnetism. It can be fairly neutral. Then you have another kind of structure that actively fractionates and messes up the magnetism, like heavy metal. You will never find heavy metal in any ancient sacred structure. Almost never. Will you ever find bliss in the presence of heavy metal? Probably not. The heavy metals, the ones that are worst are aluminum. Next bad is maybe steel. Better is maybe nickel or copper. Better is titanium. The amalgam is fatal in your teeth for lots of reasons. We'll discuss that tomorrow some. And better yet is silver or gold. But better yet is no metal at all. Any homeopath will tell you, you run, not walk home, to throw everything aluminum out of your house, right? If you put your bread in an aluminum bread box, you're better off to throw it out than eat it. Okay? So the physics of these things has to do with the geometry of charge that's introduced into the food. Yeah? So what we're understanding now is that life force